A weak, broken signal drifted through the vast emptiness of space, barely strong enough to register on humanity's deep space listening stations. It was faint, distorted by interference, but one thing was clear. It was a distress call. The technician on duty, Officer Carter, stared at his screen as the words came through, shaky and filled with static. "Help us. They are coming." Then silence. Carter's heart pounded as he replayed the message. The voice sounded desperate, terrified. Whoever sent it didn't have time to explain. They had sent only a warning before something. Someone cut them off. The signal's origin was a remote colony on the very edges of explored space, a settlement so far from major trade routes that most of the galaxy barely knew it existed. But humanity never ignored a distress call. Carter pushed the emergency alert, and within moments, the station commander arrived. Where did it come from? Commander Hayes demanded, his eyes scanning the data. "Far side of the Icarus expanse," Carter replied. "Colony designation: New Dawn. Population: 10,000, mostly civilians. No major military presence." The commander clenched his jaw. A colony that small wouldn't have the firepower to defend itself. If someone had attacked, there was little chance they had survived. But if there were even a few survivors, humanity had a duty to respond. A priority transmission was sent directly to Admiral Rains, commander of the Deathworlder fleet. Within minutes, the response came: deploy scout ships. Maintain radio silence. Report immediately upon arrival. 3 scout vessels launched, racing through hyperspace toward New Dawn. The journey took hours, but to the crew aboard, it felt like days. Tension filled the air as they neared their destination. When they finally arrived, what they saw sent chills through their bones. The colony was silent. No response to hails. No energy readings from the surface. The planetary defense grid was offline. But the most disturbing sight was the fleet of abandoned HFY warships orbiting the planet. Some were heavily damaged, others simply dead in space, as if something had torn through them. The scout team landed cautiously, weapons ready. The colony was in ruins, burned-out buildings, wreckage, and bodies. Some were human, but many were XRK, a warlike alien species known for their arrogance and brutality. The XRK Empire had expanded aggressively, but they had never openly attacked humanity before. But something was wrong. The damage wasn't just from weapons. Some of the alien bodies looked shredded, torn apart by something powerful. One of the scouts, Lieutenant Harris, activated his helmet cam and started recording. The ground was littered with blood, but the pattern was chaotic. It wasn't a clean battle. The humans had fought, but so had someone, or something, else. Then they found the security logs. The last recorded footage showed Sarkai soldiers storming the colony, slaughtering civilians, taking what they wanted. But then, minutes later, they started screaming. The footage was shaky, panicked. One of the invaders was dragged into the shadows, his armor crumpling like paper. Another tried to fire his weapon, but was pulled into the darkness with terrifying speed. The last thing the camera captured was a pair of glowing red eyes staring from the shadows. Then, static. Silence filled the scout ship as the footage ended. "What the hell is this?" Harris whispered. "No idea," the pilot responded. "But we need to get this back to Admiral Rains. Now." The scout ship lifted off, leaving the haunted colony behind. As they jumped into hyperspace, a single thought filled their minds. The XRK came as conquerors, but something was waiting for them. And now, humanity had to decide what to do next. The scout ship Argus 9 hurtled through hyperspace, its engines burning at maximum speed. The crew sat in tense silence, replaying the horrifying footage from New Dawn's last moments. No one spoke. No one wanted to. Lieutenant Harris, still shaken, clenched his fists as the glowing red eyes from the security footage haunted his mind. The XRK were brutal warriors, ruthless, efficient, and merciless. And yet, something had hunted them. Something fast. Something strong. Something that even they had feared. Back at Fleet Command, Admiral Rains stood with his arms crossed as the transmission came through. His officers watched the footage, their faces grim. The moment the red eyes appeared, the room fell silent. When the footage ended, Rains let out a slow breath. "So," he said, voice calm but edged with steel, "something wiped out a HFY war party on one of our colonies, and we have no idea what." Silence followed. Then, Commander Vale, head of intelligence, spoke. "Sir, we have limited data, but one thing is clear. The colony is gone, but they didn't go down without a fight. Some of our people were still resisting when the HFY started getting taken. Whatever it was, it didn't just kill the HFY. It hunted them." Another officer leaned forward. "The question is, sir, do we go in?" Rains turned back to the screen, watching the still image of the HFY corpses, their bodies twisted, broken, torn apart. If this had been a normal battle, the answer would have been obvious. The fleet would have already been deployed for retaliation. But this wasn't normal. Something else had been on that planet. Finally, Rains made his decision. "We're not going in blind. Dispatch a second recon team, heavily armed this time. Full stealth. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with before we make a move." Within the hour, a special operations team was en route. Unlike the scouts, these soldiers were equipped for the unknown. Predator-class exosuits, plasma rifles, and cloaking tech. If there was a fight waiting, they would be ready. As they neared New Dawn, sensors picked up something new. One of the HFY warships was moving. Barely functional, but still alive. A weak distress signal pulsed from its core. Captain Lorne, leading the strike team, made a quick decision. "We board it. If there's a survivor, we need to hear what they saw." Docking procedures began, and the team carefully breached the ship. Inside, the corridors were dark, filled with the acrid smell of burnt flesh. The walls were streaked with deep claw marks, metal bent as if something had torn through it effortlessly. Then they found him. A HFY warrior, still breathing, but barely. His armor was shattered, his claws twitching weakly. His black eyes, filled with terror, locked onto the humans as they approached. He coughed, blood dripping from his mandibles. Lorne knelt beside him. "Who did this?" he demanded. "What happened?" The HFY wheezed, struggling for breath. His voice was a raspy whisper. "You must leave. It is still here." Lorne's blood ran cold. Something was still on New Dawn. Something waiting. And it was watching them. "You said." The blackness of space surrounded the human strike team as they stood inside the wrecked HFY warship. The only sound was the weak, ragged breathing of the injured HFY warrior lying at their feet. Captain Lorne's pulse pounded in his ears as the alien's words echoed in his mind. "It is still here." Sergeant Voss tightened his grip on his plasma rifle, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, we need to leave. Now." But Lorne wasn't ready to retreat. Not yet. He activated his helmet scanner, sweeping the area. The ship's logs were still partially intact, though the system was heavily damaged. If they could extract any data from the HFY's records, they might learn what exactly had done this. The team split into two groups, one to secure the area, the other to retrieve the data. As they moved through the corridors, every step felt heavier. The walls bore deep claw marks, metal twisted like paper. Blood streaked the floors. Not all of it was HFY. Then a noise, a low, clicking sound. Voss froze. "Did you hear that?" Lorne signaled for silence, his team going completely still. The sound came again, closer this time. Clicking, followed by a soft scrape, like claws on metal. Corporal Danner checked his motion scanner. The display flickered. Something was nearby, but there was nothing visible. Lorne turned back to the injured HFY. But the alien was shaking violently now, his mandibles clicking in a mix of pain and fear. His eyes darted around, searching the shadows. He knew. Then, everything happened at once. A blur of movement shot from the darkness. Danner barely had time to scream before something pulled him into the ceiling. Blood sprayed down as his body vanished into the vents. "Kion taked," Voss roared, opening fire. The ship exploded into chaos. Shapes moved in the darkness. Fast, too fast. Red eyes flickered in the shadows, darting from wall to wall, ceiling to floor. The creatures moved with terrifying precision, evading gunfire with unnatural speed. Lorne barely caught a glimpse of them. Black, chitinous exoskeletons, razor-sharp claws, elongated heads. They looked nothing like the exarchai. They were something else. A new nightmare. "Fall back," Lorne shouted, dragging Voss with him as the creatures ripped through the team. Weapons fired, the corridors flashing with bursts of plasma. Screams filled the ship as soldiers were torn apart. The injured exarchai let out a final, gurgling breath before one of the creatures descended upon him, silencing him instantly. Lorne barely made it back to the airlock. Only 3 of his men were still alive. Voss was covered in blood, not all of it his own. The creatures had stopped chasing them. They weren't interested in the humans. Not yet. As the hatch slammed shut, Lorne gasped for breath, his heart hammering. Back on the human ship, the data from the exarchai logs finally finished decrypting. The last entry played on the screen, a desperate transmission from the exarchai warlord himself. "They are not prey. They are not predators. They are worse. We tried to conquer this world. Instead, we have doomed ourselves. Run, if you can." The video cut out. The humans weren't just dealing with an enemy. They were standing at the edge of something far worse. The ship trembled as Captain Lorne and his remaining soldiers sat in silence, watching the decrypted exarchai logs. The final transmission played on a loop, the exarchai warlord's desperate warning ringing in their ears. "They are not prey. They are not predators. They are worse." Sergeant Voss wiped blood from his face, his hands still shaking. "Sir, what the hell did we just see down there?" Lorne exhaled sharply, trying to push back the rising tension in his chest. Something the exarchai never expected, and neither did we. The surviving soldiers sat in stunned silence. The mission was supposed to be simple: investigate a distress call, determine the threat, and extract survivors. But they had walked into a massacre. Not just a battle, not a war zone. A feeding ground. Voss leaned forward, his face pale. "Sir, the creatures, they weren't just attacking. They were," he hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper, "playing with us." Lorne didn't want to admit it, but Voss was right. The way those things moved, the way they toyed with their victims, the way they let them escape, it wasn't random. It was calculated. They were studying their prey. A sharp beep broke the silence. The ship's AI had finished analyzing the data they had recovered. The screen flickered, displaying a map of the exarchai territory, but something was wrong. Voss narrowed his eyes. That can't be right." The map showed dozens of red-marked planets, worlds that exarchai had colonized, now listed as silent. Entire fleets missing. Entire populations wiped out, one by one. A cold dread settled over Lorne. This isn't just an isolated event. He clenched his jaw, staring at the data. These things have been spreading. A sudden alert flashed across the main screen. "Incoming transmission. High Command." Lorne straightened. He accepted the call, and the holographic form of Admiral Keenan materialized before them. His face was grim, his voice tight. "Captain, I don't have time for formalities. We received your preliminary report, and we have a situation." Lorne felt his stomach sink. "Sir." Keenan's expression darkened. "We detected another distress call. A colony world near the exarchai border. the same emergency frequency. Voss cursed under his breath. "Sir, if it's the same as what we saw down there." Keenan nodded. "We're not taking any chances. You are to hold position. Reinforcements are en route." Lorne hesitated. "How many ships, sir?" Keenan's eyes were cold. "All of them." Silence filled the room. Lorne exchanged a glance with his crew. A single distress signal had led them into a nightmare. Now, another one had appeared. Humanity had seen true war before, but this was something else. And if these creatures thought they could feast on mankind the way they had feasted on the XRK, they were about to learn the deadliest mistake of their existence. The fleet moved like a silent storm through the void, engines burning hot as they raced toward the source of the second distress signal. The bridge of the HFY Retribution was quiet, but not with fear, with focus. Every soldier, every officer, every pilot knew what was coming. The XRK had been wiped out by these creatures, and now they were turning their attention to human space. Captain Lorne stood at the command station, eyes locked on the holographic display of the target planet. Reports scrolled in from scout drones, each more disturbing than the last. Cities burned, communications were silent, and something moved in the ruins. Admiral Keenan's face appeared on the main screen, his expression grim. "We're going in hot, Captain. No negotiations, no mercy. This is extermination." Lorne nodded. "Understood, sir. We won't hold back." A low hum filled the ship as weapons powered up, shields reinforced, and targeting systems locked onto the unknown horrors infesting the colony. Outside, humanity's fleet prepared to do what they did best: turn predators into prey. The silence before battle was always the worst. It was the moment where doubt tried to creep in, where fear whispered in the back of the mind. But for humanity, that silence was also where resolve was forged. They weren't fighting for conquest or glory. They weren't like the XRK, drunk on their own power. They were fighting because someone had dared to challenge them. A klaxon blared across the ship. Hostiles detected. Lorne's gaze snapped to the display. The creatures weren't waiting. They were coming. Swarms of unnatural forms surged from the planet, moving through space in a way that defied logic. No ships, no technology. Just pure, living nightmares racing toward humanity's fleet like a tide of death. The order came without hesitation. All ships, fire. Space ignited. Beams of white-hot plasma. Kinetic rounds the size of buildings, and missiles screaming with payloads designed to shatter entire warships were unleashed in a coordinated storm of destruction. The first wave of creatures was ripped apart instantly, but more kept coming. Voss cursed as the scanners tried to make sense of them. They're adapting. They're shifting their movement patterns. Lorne clenched his jaw. These things weren't just monsters. They were learning. "Then we hit them harder," he growled. "Redirect all firepower to concentrated volleys. Overwhelm them before they can react." More orders echoed through the fleet, and the battle turned from a desperate defense into a brutal counterattack. Humanity did what it always did. It adapted faster. The creatures may have been the terror of the XRK, but they had never fought true war. They had never faced humanity. And now, it was far too late for them to escape. The creatures had expected fear. They had expected chaos. They had expected humanity to crumble just as the XRK had. But instead, they found resistance unlike anything they had ever faced. The void burned with the fury of human firepower. Entire swarms of the alien horrors were torn apart before they could even reach the fleet. The weapons of Earth were not just tools of war. They were the instruments of extinction. Every blast of plasma, every railgun round, every torpedo was fired with deadly precision and relentless efficiency. On the bridge of the HFY Retribution, Captain Lorne watched the battle unfold. The creatures were trying to adapt, but humanity was always one step ahead. Every time they changed their approach, human tactics shifted faster. Every time they thought they had found an opening, they were met with overwhelming force. Voss's voice cut through the controlled chaos. "Captain, the enemy is redirecting forces toward the planet's surface. If they can't win in space, they'll try to hold the colony hostage." Lorne's jaw tightened. "Not on my watch. Deploy the ground teams. I want every single one of those things wiped out." Drop ships launched from the fleet, cutting through the atmosphere like falling stars. Inside, human soldiers prepared for war. These weren't just any troops. These were the best. Deathworlders, born from a planet where survival was a constant battle, where evolution had crafted the deadliest warriors in the galaxy. Sergeant Hale checked his gear, the heavy combat armor humming as it synchronized with his body movements. Around him, the squad was silent, focused. They all knew what they were walking into. A nightmare. But nightmares meant nothing to those who had been raised in one. The moment the ships touched down, the fighting began. The creatures were fast, but humans were faster. The creatures were strong, but humans were stronger. And most importantly, they had no idea what kind of monsters they were facing. Hale's boots hit the ground, and he raised his rifle. The streets of the colony were unrecognizable, covered in alien growths, bodies, and shattered buildings. The air was thick with the sound of screams and gunfire. A shape lunged from the shadows. Hale didn't flinch. One shot, head gone. The creature collapsed, twitching as his squad pushed forward. They didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. They weren't here to hold the line. They were here to end this. Above them, the fleet continued to rain hellfire onto any remaining enemy forces in orbit. Humanity wasn't just fighting back. They weren't just winning. They were making sure the enemy never forgot the cost of challenging them. The battlefield was a graveyard of alien corpses and shattered war machines. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had transformed into something else entirely, a massacre. Humanity's response had been swift, brutal, and merciless. Captain Lorne stood on the bridge of the HSS Retribution, watching as the last remnants of the enemy fleet tried to flee. It didn't matter. No one who started this war would be allowed to escape. The order was given, and railguns fired their final shots. The last enemy warship shattered into debris, its remains drifting lifelessly in the void. On the ground, the fighting had turned into a hunt. Sergeant Hale and his squad moved through the ruined colony, flushing out any surviving enemy forces. The creatures had once thought themselves superior, apex predators that ruled the darkness of space. Now, they were nothing more than prey. One of the surviving aliens, wounded, desperate, stumbled backward, its weapon shaking in its hands. Hale stared at it, his expression unreadable behind his visor. The creature spoke in its strange, guttural language, a mix of fear and disbelief in its voice. Hale didn't understand the words, but he knew the meaning. How? How can you be this strong?" He raised his rifle. "You wanted war," he said coldly, his voice like steel. "Now you know what it really means." A single shot echoed through the ruins. The war was over, but the message was clear. Humanity would never be underestimated again.